The first thing I want to talk about is what I call a corporate life cycle, that every company, just like human beings, is born, it grows, it matures, and like every human being, it declines. And just as human beings don't like to age, companies don't like to get old. So the first message I want to talk about is this notion of a corporate life cycle and how trying to fight it is the most dangerous thing a business can do. The second message I want to deliver is the focus of a company needs to change as it moves through the life cycle, from startup to growth to mature to declining companies. And more value is destroyed around the world by companies not acting their age. Young companies that try to act old, and old companies trying to be young again. And there's an entire ecosystem that feeds these companies. Consultants, bankers, essentially I call them the plastic surgeons of business. Essentially saying, I'll give you a facelift, you can be young again. And companies keep buying into this notion over and over again. The third message I want to talk about is very specifically connected to the topic I teach, which is valuation. Now, when I say valuation, for most of you, what comes to your minds is spreadsheets and models and numbers, right? That's what we're trained to think about valuation as. In 32 years of teaching valuation, I've learned a very important lesson. It took me a while to get there. Valuation can never just be about the numbers. A good valuation always has a story embedded in it. And one of the things I want to talk about is how that balance between story and numbers changes as a company goes from being a young company to an older company. And the final message I want to deliver is we often talk about great CEOs. And I'm going to argue that what makes for a great CEO is going to change as you move through the life cycle. That what makes for a great CEO at a young company is very different than what makes for a great CEO in a mature company, which is very different from what makes for a great CEO in a declining company. So I've got a lot on the menu, so I want to get started. When I teach finance, I use a couple of structures to kind of bring through some of the broad lessons in finance. And one of the things that I find useful is the notion of a balance sheet, not an accountant balance sheet. I'm not an accountant, and thank God for that. A financial balance sheet. Let me explain how a financial balance sheet is very different from an accounting balance sheet. At one level, it looks very similar. It has assets and liabilities. But on the asset side of the balance sheet, instead of breaking things down the way accountants do into fixed assets and current assets and financial assets and intangible assets, I divide the assets of a business into assets in place, investments it's already made as a company, and growth assets. So if I look at a company like Microsoft, assets in place would include Office and Windows and what they already have in place. But growth assets is the value that I'm attaching to what I expect you to do. Next year, 2 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out, forever. Assets in place and growth assets. And on the other side of the balance sheet, there are only two ways you can fund a business. You can borrow the money or use your own money. Borrowed money we can call debt, and using your own money is equity. We can dance around these two words as much as we want, but you have debt and equity. And here's how that structure is going to help me think through the stages in the life cycle. So here's my corporate life cycle, which I promised you at the start. So as I go through each stage in the life cycle, I throw a few examples at you. And I'd like you to think about your company and where it falls in the life cycle. In a sense, for some of you, this is going to be depressing when you put your company in the life cycle, but it is what it is. So the start of the process, the birth of a company is, of course, a startup. And you can think about startups in different sectors. Right now, for instance, it's artificial intelligence might be the sector where you see startups. Last week, we had quite a commotion in markets because a company called Tilray go public. For those of you not familiar with Tilray, it's a cannabis producing company. And right now, that's a hot business to be in. The company quadrupled in its first 3 days and lost 50% in the next 2 days. But startups are young companies just coming up. There's a huge mortality rate. Most startups don't make it. If you do make it from the startup, you become a young growth company. Young growth companies are like teenagers. And you know what teenagers do, right? Incredibly stupid things. So when you see a company like Tesla or Uber, when people jump on them saying, how come you behave so immaturely? You got to behave. Remember that they're teenage companies. Teenage companies don't always think through the consequences. But the future is full of potential. Then you've got young growth companies. This is when you're at the peak of your glory. This is when you can go to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up at 6 and still function. Then you become a mature growth company. These are the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. You get amazing earnings, cash flows, and you still continue to grow. But you're still enjoying life. Then come what I call the Middle Ages. Middle age is something none of us want to get to, but there are worse things waiting for you if you think about it. You become a mature company. And then comes that final phase that nobody wants to be in, which is you're in decline. Companies are born, they mature, they decline. It's the nature of the process. And if you think about where a company falls in this process, you can already start thinking about not just how this company should be run and what it should be doing, but how to value the company. So if you think about what causes this process to evolve, here's the way to think about it. Some businesses are easy to enter and scale up in. They don't require a huge amount of infrastructure investment. They don't require decades of building up. You can grow quickly. Some businesses take much longer to build up on. That determines how quickly you go from being a startup to a mature company. Once you become a mature company, you get to reap the benefits of having built up a business before you go into decline. So what allows companies to grow quickly are ease of scaling up, how quickly you can enter businesses, and how little capital you need to grow. But what causes companies to decline are exactly those same factors. So I'm going to start off with what I believe is happening across the world that's changing the way we should be doing, not just valuation, but how we run businesses. I think life cycles for companies are getting compressed. The way I described this in one of my posts on my blog was I said tech companies age in dog years. You know what I mean by that? A 100-year manufacturing company is an old company. A 20-year tech company is a really old company. Tech companies age in dog years in the sense that they grow from nothing to something really quickly. They don't stay mature for very long before they go into decline. Let me give you two contrasts. A few weeks ago, I got a call from a reporter about GE. GE has had a glorious history, but its history is mostly behind it. Watching GE today, he said, how would you describe what GE's future looks like? I said, it looks like the Bataan Death March. There's nothing hopeful that you can see here. But before you grieve for its end, remember it has had 125 glorious years of existence. GE was founded in the last part of the 19th century. It grew through much of the 20th century, changed the way Americans used appliances, became one of the biggest, greatest conglomerates in history before it went into decline, 125 years. In contrast, take Yahoo, company that was founded in the early 1990s, very quickly went to becoming a $100 billion company in the face of 7 to 8 years. What took GE 50 years to do, Yahoo did in 7 years. It stayed as a mature company for about 7 years before it went into decline. And now all you have, when you look at Yahoo, is a Walking Dead company. There is nothing left of what can you, I remember about 4 years ago valuing Yahoo. And I initially valued its basic business, which is a search engine that nobody searches on, a mail program that nobody sends mail on, and essentially, even in its best days, you can say it's worth about 3 to 4 billion. And I think we need to adapt the way we think about business to reflect these compressed life cycles.
네.